Well, hello and a warm welcome back to Talk Norwich City. It's Jack Reeve alongside the Pinkens, Connor Southwell. We will be looking back upon about the last sort of 6 games. We've been catching up at periods through the season to see how it's going in the world of Norwich City. And Connor, the last time we spoke, everything was plain sailing and we were going, cool, is it either going to be top 2 or playoffs? Let's decide. We were sort of lambasting the international breaks on the horizon for ruining the rhythm of the Canaries. And now we've seen 6 games without a win, 3 defeats in our last 3. We jinxed it.
Yeah, I quite like international breaks. I'll shock everyone watching. I think they're brilliant, and this one has been perfectly timed. Yeah, this league always has a funny way when you think you think a team has not cracked it, but you think a team has got it and they've got a rhythm and a momentum. It's just got a nasty way of catching you on the chin and leaving you on the deck. So, yeah, maybe that's a lesson for all of us. But to be honest, I think maybe I did or didn't say this in the last video. I can't remember. But I did think the sort of top 2 talk was a little bit overblown, if I'm being honest. In the same way that I think maybe the people who are mentioning the R word relegation and maybe overblowing this situation a little bit as well. The truth is probably they're in the middle, which, I think, as we said, in maybe the very first one of these or potentially the second is probably what we expected in terms of it being a little bit up and down. So in a roundabout way, even though it's not been sort of a smooth trajectory, I think Norwich are probably where I sort of expected they would be, with more injuries.
I think that's what's made it so kind of emotional along the way, isn't it? Because it has been so topsy-turvy. I predicted kind of a mid-table-ish finish. I think you were the same. Most people looking from the outside in were saying the same thing. But we spoke last time after the 4-0 win to Hull at home. Things were flying. It was free-flowing. It was brilliant. Sargent was on fire. Science was starting to really click into gear. And then after that, you had 3 really strange games. You had a 1-1 draw with Stoke, where Norwich, Anthony Cianat scored, and it was probably a George Long error that cost us there. And then 2 really strange games where you came from 2-0 behind against Preston and 3-1 behind against Middlesbrough for points. And actually, I don't know what you were feeling, but after that Borough game, I was thinking, there's real grit here. There's real there is something happening. And then after that, 3 really kind of disappointing defeats. I mean, try and sum up the feelings throughout the last 6 and where you've been out during it.
Yeah, probably somewhat where I am in terms of the season, really, which is I think Norwich have probably played better than them results suggest. You take that first half against Stoke, I think they should have been considerably well ahead of Stoke, more than a 1-goal margin, and then obviously let Stoke back into the game, but probably should have won that game on the balance of how it went. Preston, I think if they don't give Preston a 2-goal head start, which is easier said than done, again, they ended that game the stronger, could potentially have won it, but I think a point probably on reflection was fair. Borough, I thought, was maybe the first time this season that I've seen them really get outplayed for periods. I thought Borough were the best team we'd seen at Carrow Road. I felt, taking sort of the scoreline and the comeback out of it, I thought they created the better chances. I thought they asked the most questions of Norwich as we've seen. But again, and maybe that encapsulates this crazy league in one game. It's about momentum, and you have a moment, and everything can switch. And clearly, it did that on the penalty save by George Long. So yeah, a weird one, because actually I was sort of stood at the end going, well, if Kenny McLean doesn't get sent off, Norwich probably win that game. So all those draws I think could probably have gone in Norwich's favour, and there are elements in all of them of good performance, and like you say, grit as well. I think whenever you sort of rebuild a squad and rebuild a team that maybe doesn't have that sort of natural togetherness, you're sort of waiting for it to be tested and waiting for it to be thrust in situations where it has to face adversity and stare it down. And Preston was a really good example of that, because really they started playing it 2-0. They could have lost their heads and gone under and lost that by 4 or 5. They didn't. They did what they did, returned to the way they wanted to play, and clawed their way back into that game gradually, and probably in the end ran out of steam after that second goal. That Shane Duffy goal, which I think is maybe got lost a little bit in the bad run of form. I still can't believe that happened, and I witnessed it with my eyes, to be honest. So yeah, look, I think those 3 draws all could have gone differently. I think they probably deserved to lose the Borough game and probably deserved to win the Stoke game. So maybe that's about right in terms of the way it went. And then obviously I think the last 3 are mired in mitigation and injuries and all of that good stuff. Players who, for me, it's this last 3 game week has been sort of 3 layered. I think it's been obviously the injuries, and that's clearly a massive thing. And then I think maybe the bits where you talk about injuries and people from opposition fans go, oh, well, we've had injuries as well. Yeah, but Norwich are asking guys like Jakob Sorensen, who's been injured since the opening day, to play 3 times in a week. Emiliano Marcondes, who didn't have a club last month, he's been asked to he's been really pushed to the limit, sometimes in positions that aren't his best, when he really should only be playing 60, 70 minutes. So there's that element. And then obviously the last one is probably the one that I think maybe most people have latched onto, which is the point about depth and the fact that they've acquired quite a lot of young players, and that means they're looking quite inexperienced. And I wrote about this the other day. They had Bristol City had double the amount of championship appearances in their starting 11 compared to Norwich, and Norwich had, I think, 3 players with over 100 championship appearances in their team. One was Shane Duffy, one was George Long, who I think played his 100th championship game in that game, and then the other one was Emiliano Marcondes. So when you're looking at those guys for your experience, like I say, Marcondes has been at the club a month. George Long's your second choice goalkeeper, and really then you're pinning all your hopes on Shane Duffy to inject some experience into it. So yeah, all of those factors have made this a really difficult block of games, I think. So I think everyone's probably pretty grateful that this international break has come when it has.
Absolutely. And I think, you start to really see the character of people and what people are about when things get tough. And I suspect, Johannes Hoff Thorup will be looking back at this period going, what on earth did I do wrong to get this kind of luck? It feels like the first real maybe point of criticism came in that Cardiff game when Norwich City led for basically, right up until the 90th minute, and there were slight kind of defensive tweaks towards the end, and we all know how that game unraveled towards that end point. I wasn't one that was kind of critiquing Johannes in that point. He ultimately had a really difficult situation on his hands with the players that he had at his disposal, but he's probably learned a hell of a lot from the last few weeks in terms of who he can trust within that group and who's going to perform. The criticism that will undoubtedly come his way at stages this season, how he reacts to that, and ultimately how you stop the rot, which hasn't happened yet. It's been a steep learning curve for Johannes.
It has, and I think the Cardiff game is really pertinent. You mentioned that because I think if you stop the game on, 89 minutes and Norwich have won that, we talk about, again, the narrative continues. What great resolve this team has, what great togetherness it has, and ultimately it just ran out of steam. And you're right, there was a lot of criticism, I think, for the change and obviously to go free at the back. But actually for the 5 minutes after that, it worked and it was successful, and it was designed to drag Cardiff out of their shape. And Norwich City could have had a second. I think Borja Sainz got played through. Cianat's had a chance. Jack Stacey had one cleared off the line. And actually, in terms of their sort of defensive aspects, even though they did go a bit more defensive, as teams do, particularly when you're struggling and you're running on fumes, you look at the chances that they conceded. I mean, I've got it in front of me now. They conceded 2 shots inside their own box in the second half of that game. In terms of expected goals, if you subscribe to that or if you don't, they which is a metric that basically quantifies how good the chances are that a team is having. Norwich had a higher rate of that as well, so Norwich created better chances than Cardiff. So yeah, I think it's weird how quickly it's flipped off of that. And then I think we said it at the time, and you guys probably did as well. When you have a defeat in that manner, with the team as threadbare as it was, lacking real leaders and experience and key players, to then go again at Sheffield Wednesday is so difficult. And you're right. I think Johannes will have learnt a lot, because players who maybe have been on the periphery or haven't been in that starting lineup have been asked real questions about whether they can step up, about whether they can grab the initiative, and very few of them have really. I think maybe with the exception of Oscar Schwartau against Bristol City, I'm struggling to really point out anyone who's put their hand up in this period. And look, there are reasons for that, and I think it's difficult when you have so many of these players, a lot of them new to English football, a lot of them still adapting, and what you want is a little bit of what they had before, which is when you've got a set team and a rhythm and a momentum, and you can almost drop players into that setup rather than, having those sort of experienced players, as I think they sort of did with Antti Cianats at the start of the season, where he had Sargent and Sainz alongside him. He had a midfield three of Nunez, McLean, Slimani. You had a team that was able to carry some of those players and help it in terms of minutes, whereas now those players are basically being asked to carry each other, and that's very, very difficult, I think, when you're not in an individual place where you've fully settled in and fully adapted. So yeah, it's been a difficult week, but I think in many ways that's kind of why I'm not really looking at this period with any real panic or any real fear of, well, this is what Norwich are. They're a team that's going to get beat every week, because I just don't see that. I think there's probably a bit of a perfect storm that's come together to create this. And I think the performances, barring the last two, have been probably a lot better than the results have been by and large.
We must, I mean, everyone knows the injury effects and how that's affected things in the midfield in particular. You've lost your entire midfield in one swoop, the biggest of them all. And unfortunately, we discussed this last season as well, is the long-term injury of Josh Sargent. Now, Norwich are already limited in this area. You've got Ashley Barnes, who said on the TNC watch along that he was considering retirement because he just could not get to the bottom of his kind of injury issues. And you've got Ante Cianats, who Norwich paid big money for, but is still incredibly fresh. Having seen Ante Cianats kind of out wide and through the middle, I'm still taking the opinion that I think there's something there, and there is raw talent, but that certainly needs polishing. And I guess Norwich aren't really in the position at the moment to afford that kind of time when he is now the main man. How do you see that front three shaping up in the coming weeks and months until Sargent returns?
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? I agree with you. I think I'd probably be inclined to give Ante Cianats a run, even if he's a little bit raw, even if he's maybe not polished to the extent that he needs to be. I think there's been flashes of what he is. I think Dean Ashton on Radio Norfolk described him as being a little bit like a puppy, and he does something and you think he's adorable, and then he runs into a door or something, and that was quite a nice analogy, I think, to sum him up. But yeah, there's clearly talent there, and actually I think it might have been the last international break, there was a really good piece done on him in Poland, basically about his development in the country and how he became the player that commanded the fee that he did from Norwich City. And a lot of that centered around how slowly he started at his former club, Rakow. And it really took until sort of this time last year where he began to step forward a little bit. So I think there has been probably a little bit of integration about the reasoning behind it. I see a lot of similarities to Cianats than what I did with Josh Sargent when he came in terms of his physique. I think there's probably a need to bulk up a little bit to improve that physicality, because he was one of the top sort of pressers in Poland, but you've walked into a completely different league with a completely different intensity in England, and the physical requirements for that go up a gear. And so, yeah, I'd be inclined to give him a run. And actually, I think, there's a lot of talk about, well, do Norwich have a sort of striking issue? I think there's probably more needs to be said about maybe the wide areas. I think beyond Borja Sainz on that right side, they've really got a lack of options there. Kate Gordon hasn't really come in and impressed either in training or in games, beyond maybe a few early cameo appearances. Christian Fashnacht obviously has struggled for fitness. Onel Hernandez has struggled for fitness. So I don't think that's helped, because it's probably made him have to play as a wide option a lot more than maybe he wanted to, and maybe planted this seed in people's head that he is that. But he is a number 9. He played as a number 9 in Poland, and there's a need for him to sort of step up, I guess. So yeah, all of those elements make this a really interesting discussion. I don't think the Emi Marcondes false 9 experiment really worked particularly well.
Would that have been a concern for Ante Cianats? Because I subscribe to the same kind of thinking as you in terms of Cianats looks like a 9. It kind of has the build of a 9. He's been fine out wide, but actually the strengths that he's brought to that position, I feel are kind of better suited to the 9. And then we turn up at home to Bristol City, and it's Marcondes through the middle. That just confused me slightly.
Yeah, I think the idea was to try and maybe stretch and get more out of the width. I think actually what it did probably was Marcondes ended up being so deep that really Norwich became quite one-dimensional in terms of their attacking play, because Borja Sainz was the only one that really wanted to stretch the play, and Cianats is somebody who wants to float inside and into those kind of half spaces. So this is why I think it was probably a key reason why Norwich struggled to get the ball up the pitch and create chances, because a lot of their possession was okay actually in terms of their build up, and in terms of sort of the first 2/3 of it was connecting it, because their shape was so narrow and they didn't have Josh Sargent playing on the shoulder to push a defence back that creates space. They didn't have any of that. And if you're going to play with a false 9, then you need to have 2 wide options that want to have chalk on their boots and want to get really high and want to stretch teams and want to get in behind. And they had that on one side with Sainz, but they didn't on the other. And in the end, what it became was the ball being played to Borja Sainz and him trying to beat 5 men to try and create something. And that's just not sustainable. So again, I think there's 2 sides to this, because realistically, if Norwich had a wide right area, let's say hypothetically they'd have kept Johnny Rowe and you could play him out there, then really what Ante Cianats would have been, his adaptation would have been able to be more gradual. It would have been able to maybe not be in the spotlight as it is at the moment. But it's a very difficult role to recruit for behind the strike. And we saw it when Norwich had Teemu Pukki, because to try and recruit a player and to tell them, oh yeah, we want to sign you and we want to believe in you, but equally you're not going to get many minutes because there's this guy that's in front of you and he's, the best all-round player in the championship. And so it's difficult, and most players aren't going to take that. So they probably needed to get one that was able to play in another position. And obviously, Sienats, by all accounts, wasn't the choice they wanted to go for. They wanted to go for Yildirim, and obviously it was a knee issue that caused that to break down. Likewise, Kate Gordon wasn't their first recruitment choice. So yeah, it's a tough situation. It's one that needs to work because they're going to be without Sargent for a long period of time. So I'm not necessarily convinced. I want to be proven wrong, but at this stage, it doesn't really feel like Ashley Barnes is maybe the sort of option that they need in that area. So yeah, part of me is inclined to give Antti Sienats a run of games and use it as a really good education, but equally that sort of requires other players, I think, in other areas to really step up and add to what Norwich City are doing creatively.
Well, I mean, certainly for these younger players, your Oscar Schwartau's, your World, and it includes Sienats in that list. They probably didn't dream of an opportunity, that comes along this quickly. Well, the beautiful outcome of all of this is listening to your podcast, Connor, and hearing Paddy trying to come up with solutions and eventually falling on El Hernandez through the middle. It feels very kind of Puemaswal Poeta at left back and Stephen Whittaker in centre midfield. It's an experiment that could work, and maybe we'll be forced into that very soon. I always like kind of trying to still work out the expectation of where the club are at. And I think we've kind of gone slightly up and down in terms of where we think the club is at. And this has been a really good, humbling experience over the past few weeks to make us realise, one, just how tough the championship is and how brutal it is and how quickly things can change. West Brom away, the game straight after the international break, and then actually quite a nice run. Plymouth, Luton, QPR, Portsmouth. They'll be, I suspect, targeting those games to pick up some serious points. In terms of the group and what the messaging will be from within that group, where do you think they're at in terms of, right, we've played X amount of games. We're a fair chunk of the way into the season now. What's the outcome from here once we've got half of the injured players back?
I think it's got to be calm. It's got to be a message of calm. Probably in the same way that last international break, nobody should have got maybe as high as they did, and it's understandable because particularly from the supporters, everyone's emotional, and that's why we love the game, because it's so tribal and emotional and all of those elements. But I think equally now it's about not getting too low because you've lost a few games that are heavily wrapped in mitigation. Because for me, as I've said throughout this, I think they probably should have more points than they have in the games that they've played. They probably should have more wins than they have, and I think, barring the last two, they've performed at a pretty consistent level, and a pretty good consistent level. So all of those things make me think that this is just a blip, and that it's one that can be overcome, and one really that sadly is only solved by time and is only solved by getting key players back. And after the international break, hopefully Angus Gunn will be back for West Brom, and obviously after that game, Kenny McLean becomes available again. You're looking at maybe, as we've mentioned, Ashley Barnes and Onel Hernandez coming back into the mix. You could easily throw in Marcelino Nunez, hopefully there within the first week of the return as well. So all of those elements begin to make you look a bit stronger. Obviously, Anis Ben Slimani came back before the break, maybe a little bit prematurely, but he came back. So options are beginning to arrive, and I think when they return, they add that stability and help some of those younger guys who maybe as a collective have really struggled to grasp an opportunity, because they're probably all looking around at each other and wanting somebody to put their hand up and to grab it a little bit. And that's really difficult when you're in the situation and you're of the profile that they are. So I hope that's the message over this break, that actually it's not one, we're not talking about a Norwich team that's overperformed and that has got 4 wins when they should have lost every game and they've been dreadful. That's not the case. So I think it's just about remaining consistent and knowing that actually a few results the other side, even if they lose at West Brom, a few results, Plymouth, as you mapped out, Plymouth, Luton, QPR, gives them an opportunity to get going again and to get going quickly. And what this run of games allows it to do, as much as we obviously love now international breaks and how brilliant they are, it allows them to have a real run and hopefully achieve some rhythm and momentum leading up to the next one, which is in March. So yeah, I think this is one that is a really good period for them, and will probably, this block of games, I think, between now and obviously that next international break, will ultimately decide where they sit in the table. So I think it's about opportunity, it's about calm, and it's about just continuing to do what they're doing, because as we saw when they did that against Hull, against Watford, they looked a really good team at this level. So that's what the aspiration has to be, I think.
And you say that, you know, the fix being time and patience, and ultimately that's the toughest thing as a football fan and probably as someone within the building, because you're constantly trying to find solutions and fixes. And actually, a lot of these things are healed through people just coming back to fitness. You mentioned there, you know, even with Angus Gunn and Kenny McLean back inside, suddenly the dynamic of everything looks very, very different, because actually, you know, without piling any more hate onto George Long, you know, probably in the draws, you take out his mistakes and they all turn into wins. And, you know, with Gunn in goal, you have far more hope. And Kenny McLean, well, we know the energy and the experience that he brings to the setup. So hopefully a corner to be turned very soon. Connor, thanks very much for your time as always. Some clarity and peace on the TNC channel, which is always brilliant. Head over to the Pink and there's loads of great stuff, including Paddy trying to figure out if Ono Hernandez can play in the 9, which is thoroughly entertaining. Head over there and we'll see you all very soon. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye-bye.